Welcome to Building Legendary Leaders, the podcast where leaders leave behind chaos and step into clarity. This is where real stories come alive with the struggles, breakthroughs, and lessons that shape the most effective executives today. Every episode delivers fresh insights you can apply to your own leadership journey. If you are ready to stop putting out fires and start leading with purpose, this is the place for you. Here is your host, Jim Saliba.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to Building Legendary Leaders. Let's dig right in. Today's guest grew up on cattle ranches where hard work, grit, and teamwork aren't just lessons, they are survival skills. She carried that mindset to a global career, leading technology companies through bold transformations, uniting cultures, building teams, and delivering extraordinary value at scale. She helped grow software platforms into the billion-dollar level. And today, she's shaping the future as the CEO of Emberst. Outside of work, she is competitive as ever, a lifelong equestrian who still rides, competes, a traveler who explored 70 different countries. Please join me in welcoming Marne Martin.
Hello, and it's a pleasure to be here, James, and it's a pleasure all of you watching to meet you as well.
It's great to have you. Let me lay it out to our audience of what we're going to cover today. Today, we're diving into one of the biggest tests of leadership, building shared vision across cultures that started from very different worlds. When a company grows through multiple acquisitions, from a lifestyle driven founders to high performance, growth focused teams, aligning everyone to one mission becomes both a challenge and the opportunity. So here's how we're going to break it down for today. We'll start with the value of a shared vision, how to bring people together around that common purpose, even when they come from very different worlds. Then we'll explore the real leadership challenge, developing leaders from every level from the front line through the C-suite. Who's going to carry the vision and the culture forward to glue this all together? Next, we'll look at what it takes to stay connected, flat, maybe a little matrixed, as you scale, keeping clarity and focus. We'll end up with learning how not control becomes the engine, why rhythm, curiosity, adaptability beat rigidity every day. And for those who stay to the end, Marty is going to share her secret sauce on how she connects with people in ways that create and unlock performance, turn strategy into a living, breathing culture. Wow, that sounds like we're going to do a lot today.
I think we are. It'll be a packed hour for sure.
So here's my first question. Arnie, through most of my own career, whenever we talked about change, that framework of people, process, and technology always come up sooner or later. But in my experience, most leaders jump immediately to process and technology, while the people part really gets often reduced to hiring, firing, and annual reviews. In our previous conversation getting ready for this, you told me you take a very different approach to that scaling. How did that shift click in for you?
So first off, people are at the heart of our everything that we do, right? Our world, if you think about humanity, there are consumers, there's also our users, and of course there are employees. So frankly, I think it's illogical to start with process and technology when people are at the heart of how we implement it and also how we consume what we want to sell. Also, personally, I think people are fascinating and I love technology. Process, if I had a job that only had to do process, I probably would be quite bored. I will admit that. But But, it's really people that you need to be able to action the outcomes. And frankly, you can't be a leader if you're not looking people first. So I could talk about this all day, but when I connect with people and I understand how we can work together, what we can accomplish, and I bring together teams that can achieve an outcome, an upper quartile outcome, that is then what drives the process. And technology is changing all the time. So, yes, you have to be current in technology, you have to be innovational in technology. But then it also goes back to the people. You have to take them on the learning journey to embrace the technology, to want to buy the technology. So, there's obviously aspects of how I became a better leader, thinking about the different cultural aspects. And it's also how we coach not only the companies I lead through change, but also the companies that are our customers. How do we bring them and their people through change?
So it's all about people, but people are going to be looking in different directions. They have different futures. How do you bring them together to what we call a shared vision?
So I definitely think whether you use the word vision, purpose, mission, some people will really have a preferred word. For me, I think it's all a flavor. It's like whether you like, Napolitano or vanilla chocolate strawberry ice cream in and of itself. So again, people have to have that connectivity. They have to have trust, respect, and the alignment towards accomplishing something. Like, to be a good employer, you pay people salaries on time, you treat them well, etc. But that doesn't actually connect with their spirit or their heart, that they feel that they're part of a bigger vision, a bigger purpose, a bigger mission. And that's something that I always evidence in the choices that I make. I only go to companies that I'm very passionate about. And frankly, all the things that I've done in life have been from passion and continue to be. And that really is what I can unify across what are quite divergent or individualistic backgrounds into a performance culture that everyone has a place in creating the outcome that we are working to create, and really changing something in an industry, or something that can align and have that inflection point.
So I like that you really brought the concept of purpose forward in this. And yes, we can call it different flavors, whether it's vision or mission. Um, there's a book by Daniel Payne called Drive, and he talks about what people really want. And yes, money is important to a certain effect because I need to take care of myself. I need to take care of my family. But he brings out that there's three things for people. Purpose is one of them. Right? Mastery of being able to do what I do in a very great way, and autonomy that I am smart enough and free enough to make some of my own decisions. With that driving purpose, you have different companies that come into yours. You acquired many companies along the way, and they all had different purpose. They all had different mastery. How do you bring them all together?
So there, I think, it's always interesting when you think across bringing founder cultures, say that are American founder cultures versus looking internationally, because founders all around the world will have certain instincts and things, I think, that unite them. And then, of course, there'll be different attributes that might make very different cultures and how they're manifested in an individual acquisition. So I'll start first with kind of, where I'd say bridging the gap between moving to a founder to more of a private equity, or even a company getting ready to do an IPO, what I would call more of a performance culture. And then I'll also talk a little bit about the bridges that I think unite people cross culturally all around the world. And, this did come from my childhood when I moved from a ranching background to, Washington, D.C., and then obviously also to London when I studied there. It was as much of an adjustment for me to move from Wyoming to DC as it was from DC to London. And I think that's both the beauty and sometimes the challenge in the United States, that we really are such a diverse culture across states, across communities, across backgrounds. So when you think about changing a founder-owned culture and those leadership styles, I think purpose is even more important because the people that align with the founder, yes, there was a purpose or they wouldn't have aligned with the founder, but now you're changing things that maybe their product that they were really passionate about maybe gets sunsetted or maybe gets changed or combined. Right there, they may not have the same place or intimacy of relationships that they had in a smaller company as they scale. But on the other hand, to the people that really do thrive in mastery, and I love that you use that word, you can give them the opportunity to scale with a company and continue growing that often a lot of the smaller founder owned companies don't. So there will be some people that, I always say, even as a child, you could see the people that wanted to be a big fish in a small pond versus the people that really embraced the challenge to be a big fish in a bigger pond, right? And that's the same. You need to be looking for those people that want to continue being part of a bigger pond with still the common purpose. When you're doing acquisitions that fit in a certain vertical or a certain horizontal type of software, you'll already have more domain experts that are aligned with kind of hopefully changing that category of software in a better way. I think for companies like a Roper or a conglomerate that works across many different areas, there, I think it's even more important that you almost think about not building a missionary culture in the sense of being missionary in that respect, but your culture has to be like who you are as people. And there, I think even the values become even more important. They're always important, but when you're not uniting against going in against a competitor or bringing AI into an industry or some sort of inflection point that people can relate to, then it has to be even more than what's typical around kind of the values and who you are as a company to make the bridge.
Okay, so you're using this to make the bridge. It's working for you. What have you seen others do wrong that it didn't help them?
So, I think impatience is often the enemy of seeing this through. I think many people who are successful as executives, especially as their career matures and they have more and more success, they often think, "Hey, I've said this once, people should follow me." Okay? In reality, to get the type of leaders in your organization, yes, they want a leader that they can respect. So first off, you need to be a leader that they can respect. I think it never works if they don't have respect for the person at the top, frankly. And I think a lot of people blame cultural problems on the fact that they actually never learned or never earned the respect of the employee base. And it doesn't mean that everyone will like you. That's impossible. But you do want in the high performing cultures, you have the respect of the employees. Otherwise, they won't align with your purpose of what you're doing. So first off, you have to earn respect. I learned that as a child, and part of that's hard work, part of that is listening, part of that's praise, but also pushing people to be even better. All of that is what spills into respect. I think the second part is recognizing that you may have to meet people and talk to them when you're aligning cultures and building, near new career paths and all these things 100 times, right? You may have to do town halls when you don't want to do, or you may have to go meet offices when you don't want to meet them, or spend time with people in one-on-ones. And that's something that, never really stops. So I do think perseverance, I mean, some leaders lack enough perseverance to really see it through and see the change. And it doesn't happen in a month or two. I think so, often it's somewhat naive to say, "Hey, okay, I can do a layoff, that can happen tomorrow," but actually building culture and trust takes weeks, months, years. And then the third is people have to be inspired, okay? And, not every company will have an inspirational message, but it's always easier to lead, unite culture, really bring forward also a performance based culture when you have something that is inspiring to your people, to your customers, to your industry. And then, of course, when you can match that to financial results, it's even easier.
A couple of things really jumped out at me in this. The first one was saying it 100 times. You can't just say it once. People listen at different things. One of the quotes that I love to use is communication. The problem with communication is the illusion that it actually happened. There are so many layers between us and the people we're talking to, even if they're face to face to us, never mind if there's 3 or 4 layers of leaders in between. Um, how do you get through all that and feel like you're getting through?
Well, you obviously have to test it, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But going back, I remember someone once said, "Oh, Marnie, you talk too much," and I'm like, "Okay, but I'm trying to reach people that are very different generationally, culturally, etc. So I'm trying to talk to different individuals in different ways." So if you're only talking one on one to someone you know very well, their listening style, because remember, and I love that you said this, communication is actually more about not the person speaking, but the person listening. And I always say that you can't have change or you can't have learning if it didn't come in, the person listened to it, processed it in their brain, and it became a bit of their fabric, right? And you have to have neuroplasticity, of course, for active listening and learning. So I always think about what is the engagement I have with people. And it's interesting, even when I was working in countries like Japan or elsewhere, it was actually difficult because I didn't have as many body language tells. Like I always said, even if we weren't speaking English, if the body language we had resonance, like there was interactions from body language, I used body language reading a lot to tell, was that person engaged with what I was saying? Are we communicating? I think in the bigger picture, when you go beyond body language tells, then you have to really test in kind of the outcomes, the after effects of the communication. Sometimes those might be surveys, like engagement type surveys. Sometimes they'll be what I call re-recruiting or re-opting in. And often the ultimate test will be, have people become more coachable, right? Because we can be good coaches, and as much as I consider myself a strong leader, I always work to be a really good coach. But coaches are only measured really on how well people evolve and train, and then what they do on the field or in the company, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's ultimately the measurement that you have. Are you being a good leader? Are you being a coach? And do you see it kind of in the outcomes, how people evolve, participate in high performing teams themselves, what the company is able to accomplish, the scale and pace? And that's ultimately when you have done a good job, but then you have to keep doing a good job. Like it'll quickly drop off if you say, "Oh, I'm tired," or the company goes and finds a different CEO that's not as good at motivating and interacting with people and frankly caring about them.
Well, I find that really interesting that you talked about coachable and you're coaching your people. As a coach myself, I can only measure myself by how well my clients perform. It's not it's not my performance. Otherwise, why would they come to me? Because I talk well? And if I coach well and I coach my leaders, this brings us into that other topic we were going to talk about, developing leaders from every level, from the front line all the way up to the C-suite. Are you coaching every level or are you coaching people to coach people? How does that work in your organization?
So it's a mixture. I the more time I spend with people personally, effectively I'm coaching them more just but I firmly believe that the coaching has to be at every level, and even when I'm giving, bigger town halls or interacting with people, etc., there's always aspects of me listening and learning, and there'll be some things that I'll be able to influence. Other times I'll say, look, this is a high potential person. This is what I noticed. And then we'll arrange coaching around that, whether it's something we can do internally, or there's also high performing people that we recognize we don't have the skills to coach them. We go get them an external coach. So one of the biggest fallacies I think is people that don't think of leadership versus management. You can have good managers that aren't good coaches and leaders. I don't think they'll ever be the top managers, but they'll be good managers. But we really need to be coaching people down to the frontline staff. And certainly there's coaching that's also needed, first time C-level role, first time on a board, all that sort of stuff. Obviously, everyone thinks of that. But the coaching to the frontline people, I think, is often forgotten, and it's super powerful to the results of a business because, like I tell people, I still answer all my own emails. I talk to customers. They ping me on LinkedIn. I respond to my own LinkedIn, et cetera, et cetera. But even being quite open and engaged, I'm not going to talk to a lot of our customers and the people inside those customer businesses as much as many of our frontline people will. So if you ignore coaching of individual contributors or those kind of starting out their career or on the front lines, you actually are missing what is a huge driver of performance, culture, engagement. And that's actually based on how the management pyramid works in businesses. That'll be the bulk of your employees. Like we do care about spans and layers. I always keep an eye on spans and layers because I think you want to keep an organization as flat as possible. Not only does it build cost if it's not as flat as possible, but you also can't be interacting with as many people and being as close to where you need to influence, either reward as a positive outlier or coach or do something more dramatic if there are problems.
I say to a lot of people and my clients that I work with that it's interesting that we often promote people based on their technical skill. And then we're totally surprised when they're not instantly and magically great at managing and leading people, which coaching is such a central part. So when you bring together different cultures, and you want them to do this coaching throughout the organization, how do you make that happen to align all those cultures?
So I think that there are certain things that, makes a good person, a good coach, and a good leader. Like it's interesting all across pretty much every religion in the world or people that don't believe in religion. We pretty much know what is a good person. I mean, a good person in society. I'm not talking about a good person in a company, but in a good person in society, we actually have quite tight alignment. When you think about then what we want in a company and a coach, the principles of how it makes people feel and whether you have trust in an organization bridges pretty much every type of culture you can have. So I always go to the fundamentals. Like, what are the fundamentals of how you build trust and performance? And that is what will align across generations, cultures, etc. How it manifests, of course, can vary a little bit. Certain generations, certain cultures want to be interacted with a little bit different. They'll prize certain things a little bit differently. But when you talk about building trust, that's actually a unifier across culture. And from there, you can really push the performance. I think also we have to be very careful. And I have a little question that I ask. And it's also, I guess I'll give people my trick question I ask when we're looking to promote a manager, or if I'm talking to someone who's thinking about going into being a manager, I always ask them one question. Are you happier when you succeed, or are you happier when your team succeeds? If they come back and tell me that they need like the affirmation or the reward of them doing a task and them succeeding, they will never be the best leader, coach, manager because they're not getting the personal affirmation from the team succeeding. And that seems like a little thing, but it's really not. And the further you go up as a larger and larger manager, like typically the technical people start with what we call player coach. In a player coach, it's probably okay, right? You're not managing so many people. Most of the people you manage will still respect that you have the technical skills that they do. You'll be teaching them, etc. But once you move beyond a player coach into more what I'd call the layers of management, including taking on maybe more P&L responsibility and perhaps a path to the C-suite. The best leaders really take pride in their teams and their companies doing well. It doesn't mean that they don't earn money from the performance and they don't take pride in what they do, etc. But that is really what I have found is powerful. The team knows that I'm proud of them, right? They know when they do something really well, or maybe they didn't think enough about a topic, and I'm say, hey, these are the things that are good. These are the things go work on. What's interesting, and this is also a tell that I use, is next time when you have the review, are more people excited to speak up and show that they really dug in and addressed kind of the deficiencies or the things I thought they should think more of? When they do, like, you get more positive engagement. People dug in, they really did the work, and they're proud to show off their work. That's also a huge indication of a great performance culture. When you see it go the other way, that people are like running away, they don't wanna take responsibility, they don't wanna engage. That is an early warning sign of a declining culture. So you really have to take these reads and these tells and be involved almost like a sampling, almost like an auditor thinks about sampling. You need to also, as a CEO, in my opinion, also have kind of your meeting samples and, go and listen and really try and collect some non-filtered feedback, because if you allow it, many people will also isolate a CEO. Like, well, some CEOs aren't great to bring bad news to at all, but you have to remember that to be an effective coach, you have to coach with wins and losses, right? I mean, there's so few teams that win every game, even if they win a World Series. Which, speaking of which, we're of course in that now with baseball. But I remind, even the top performers don't make every shot. They don't win every game. So even when you have a top performance culture, you have to be thinking about how you cultivate the people in that journey, and it won't mean that they're perfect.
So I love this because I'm a coach, and I love that you talked about coaching wins as well as coaching losses. I don't think we spend enough time looking at our wins. We win, we check the box, and we're off to the next thing. We don't spend enough time to look at it and say, well, what really worked here? And how do I anchor that behavior for next time? But when we fail, we're willing to spend a lot of time to say, well, what can we do better? And I think we need to have clarity on both of those things to help us focus on what's important.
That's actually another, you just made me think of a bit of the neural biases of people. So what's fascinating, if you study kind of how humans' brains work, some of the default modes in humans' brains also cross culture. Like, more people will be downside risk oriented, avoiding pain or failure and wanting to obsess about it, than celebrating wins and being risk takers and things like that. And that's really interesting that pretty much crosses gender, generations, cultures, etc. So I also have spent a lot of time thinking about the neural psychology of how you develop teams, and both neuroplasticity so that you can create people that can learn at a faster pace, but also the psychology of how you need to move people more to the psychology of winning. And it doesn't mean that you don't say, hey, I could have done that better, we all could have done that better. You have to own it. But the psychology of winning and studying how you win actually creates more performance trajectory and confidence throughout the organization, top to bottom, than the psychology of failing and avoiding. And that, because the psychology of avoiding failing just creates more fear of failure. It actually doesn't teach teams how to win.
I love that. We did say we were going to talk about how learning is a engine of transformation. So, how do we take that and move it towards people coming together in different cultures and the transformation to unlock performance?
So I think there's obviously a lot of tools, and I'll talk about some of the conventional tools, but I also love getting to know people. I think, That's one of my secret sauces. I really remain fascinated with people as individuals and getting to know something about them. As we get to know better people and who they are and they start trusting us with more feedback, that trust opens up their brains to learn at a faster pace, right? So again, I'm a huge fan of trust to build cultures, build performance, and also to be able to accelerate learning. If people aren't in a place that their brain is accepting of knowledge, then they'll never be able to learn despite how much knowledge you try to impart, right? I think a lot of people blame the lack of learning on sometimes they haven't hired people that like to learn. Okay, so that might be actually a hiring problem. But they blame, say, oh, my enablement materials or this or that, when actually they don't have a culture of finding out not only what we want the people to learn, okay? We as managers and, companies and what have you will always say, "Hey, I want to enable this." And that is important. But if you're and even here at Emburse, the participation in Educate Day has grown dramatically because yes, there are some things we're inflicting on them, okay? But there's other things you're like, what do you want to learn about? What are you curious about? And the fact that people can have a voice to learn more of what interests them, and again, it doesn't mean that, everyone's going to be interested in the same things, but that's how you create kind of the secret sauce, the magic environment to accelerate learning. And I think, my mother taught for many, many years. It was also interesting that a lot of the people I've worked with were also dyslexic, right? I'm a very fast reader. I was an early reader as a child. Like I can process a ton of written information and very accurately learn from written information. But a lot of people need kind of reinforced learning in different mechanisms, different methods. And then you also have to be testing the learning. Like, I always say the process for short term to go into long term memory in the brain. And often we only test, hey, did the person in the short term portion of the brain learn this? And it actually hasn't become indelible. It's not into the long term learning. So you really have to be measuring learning in kind of the short, medium, long term, and then building a culture. Again, that could be a bridge that people are building, the building blocks. You don't become the best in the world at anything if you haven't learned the basics and then you gain competencies and you go from there.
I love that you brought that up because I always say when we were in elementary school, we could sit there and just absorb information. But as adults, we're very different. We learn experientially. We'll read, we'll see things, but unless we actually put it into action, we try it out and we experience it and did it work or didn't it work and how we're going to modify it, we don't remember it as adults.
Not everyone's like that. I have a weird brain that I'm a kinesthetic learner and I'm one of the rarest Meyer-Briggs for women. So there's probably a lot of people that really didn't understand me as we are growing up until you could talk through that. But for me, I can still learn experientially. I can also learn vicariously, et cetera, et cetera. But you are, and that makes me say a faster learner, and I'm not afraid of learning. I like it. It's fun for me. The point you make is exactly what I wanted to talk about is that I can structure learning and as a leader for me to lead myself. I mean, yes, I can push myself and learn every day, but I have to be thinking of how I meet the people that are in the company, in the office, in the group. How do they learn and how do we have to tweak this? I'll say a lot of CEOs don't really ever get involved in what kind of learning culture are we? Are people actually learning or we're just talking to them, we're just trying to teach them, but they're not a very effective, maybe we have effective teachers, maybe we don't, but we're not looking at. So I think that is something that a lot of CEOs, I don't think focus enough on that in their companies. They either think that's someone else's job or, they've moved to a stage it's no longer their job or whatever it is. But it's the lifeblood of how a company will evolve and also not get stale. I think it's like, there's certain jobs you can do the same job perhaps all your life, maybe. But even, in agriculture, there's certain things that, always stay the same, and there's other things that change a lot.
I could talk about this all day because this is what I love. But I'm gonna switch gears a little bit. You mentioned your mom, she was a teacher. You mentioned that you grew up on cattle ranches. Let's talk about you as a child. What was your childhood like growing up on Wyoming, I think you said?
Well, so my family moved west after the Civil War and settled in Oregon, Montana, and Wyoming. Also, they had a ranch in Canada between the 1860s and the 1880s. So that was a really interesting story. It was when people say, "Oh, things are tough," I'm like, "Okay, well, you didn't like really go into nothing." So I'll say that the stories that we had on the resiliency, I kind of grew up that my grandfather made the joke that my first words were "me can do it," and I was a very independent kid. When we were at the ranch in Oregon, I escaped the yard when I was 2 to go try and ride my dad's horse named Dan. My mom, of course, thought I would, had fallen in the pond or whatever she created in her mind, worried about me. But I was fine. I was just trying to go, crawl up on Dan to go ride him. So I was a very independent kid, and that continued. I mean, even when I was 5 and what have you, I would go off and do stuff. And then on the ranch, as crazy as it might seem, by the time I was 6 or 7, I was crawling up on the ponies, and then later, by the time I was 8, I could get the horses saddled and or jump on them by myself, and I would just go off and ride. Sometimes I drag my sister along, sometimes not. So I tell people that later when I started working internationally, well, even moving to DC and then London, that started when I was a very young child, that I was willing to do things that might have seemed scary to other people, and I was very independent, and I trusted that, okay, everything might not go exactly how I planned, but I would figure it out. And I think there's a lesson I try and teach the teams that I lead and the companies that I lead, the confidence that we will figure it out, right? And sometimes I tell them the stories that, okay, you know, I didn't have to walk home, fortunately, so I got good at staying on because, it's kind of a bummer to have to walk 5 miles home and an embarrassment if you get bucked off the horse. That's partly what made me a very good rider. But, you have to practice calculated risk taking. And again, benefited from being a smart, independent child, and my parents, I guess, both gave me structure and a lot of challenge to be good at things, but they also gave me the room to be independent and kind of try things out and, you know, see what worked, see what didn't, and learn from that. And that continued through at the various ranches. My grandfather had the largest ranch, about 100,000 acres, and there we'd also go in elementary school to cow camp in the summers and later when I got into athletics, I didn't have as much time, but, then also learning time management. I did athletics, graduated high school valedictorian. I also did music. I was a first chair flautist. I don't know how I did all these things, but I think that kind of multitasking and how you had broad-based achievement. Again, I was really fortunate that I had enough successes and also, hard things to learn from and develop the resiliency, as well as, I probably had some aptitude as we moved between Oregon, Montana, Wyoming with different experiences to benefit when I went into the workforce. Because I can tell you, when I told people that, my first job out of school, we were going to build telco networks around the world, and I was headed to Venezuela back in 1996 or 97, I forget. I can tell you I got a few strange looks, but it was the first GSM cell phone company in the world, in the Americas, right after the first they had done in Europe. And then from there, we did a lot of, first things in technology. And I tell people that, it's an honor to be first. But a lot of people don't wanna be first, they'd rather be a follower, and that's something that, I try to I mean, obviously, it's nice when you have people that, lead natural leaders or, they're good at taking calculated risks. I say those people are quite easy for me to fit well, But the measure of me as a leader, as a coach, as an executive, is the people that either aren't as used to taking calculated risks, or they don't even know that they have the potential to do something that is complicated or hard. And getting those people to grow and know that actually they have a lot more skills than they thought. Maybe their childhood didn't bring it out, or their early working careers. That I'd say gives me so much satisfaction to see the lights go off, the practice. And there's a lady, we were on a call earlier today. I met her. She was, a consultant from a long time acquisition Inverse had made, there in Canada. Like, people talked about her in good terms, but she did really, no one saw her really as a high performer. She's great, right? And her confidence and her respect in the organization, and that has just built and built and built. And I'll tell you, that gives me as much happiness as, when I've mentored first time C-level or first time CEOs. So you really have to have the joy of helping people have achievement, right? And that's something that, it started my career. It started my career early on. It came from my childhood also of wanting to be good at things and getting rewarded, even not monetarily, but with success. But you really have to push yourself to continue to be successful. Like, I always say, I'm not perfect, but overall I'm good at a lot of things, and I've had a very successful life and a very successful career. But I always say that I never have a favorite, because what I do tomorrow might be my favorite thing I've ever done.
This was really great, Marnie. I loved our conversation. If you could leave our people with one word, what would that word be?
Joy. Find joy in what you do. Bring joy to the people you work with, the people you interact with. And again, that doesn't mean that you pretend everything's good when it's not good. That's not what I mean. But find joy. That is what I think often is lost or lacked in our companies, our interactions with each other, our society. So, my word for today is joy.
Is joy. I think that really sum up that purpose and mastery that we talked about earlier. Why don't you tell people how they could reach you? Can you share some contact information?
For sure. So, since everything seems to be on the deep web, you probably can look at a lot of information there. But otherwise, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to connect with you and again continue this conversation.
Thank you very much. Again, I'm sure our listeners are going to love this conversation. Thank you for being on the show.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Building Legendary Leaders podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode.